My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 31 years old. 3 years ago, my husband's entire family stood in the parking lot of a funeral home and told the police, the pastor, and anyone who would listen that I had stolen $200,000 from my mother-in-law while she was dying. No investigation, no receipts, no proof. Just my father-in-law's voice, loud and certain, and a family that had already decided. They froze me out of the estate. They pressured my husband until he filed for separation. They got a civil attorney involved, and I spent 2 years being called a thief by people who had watched me sit at that woman's bedside for the last 8 months of her life. Then, last month, my sister-in-law called me, the one who had never spoken a word in my defense. She said, "I need to show you something Mom left. I think you need to see it before my dad does." Before I tell you what was in that envelope and how it dismantled everything they built against me, I need to ask you something. If the family you married into accused you of something you didn't do and your own husband started to believe them, would you stay or would you walk away? Type stay or walk in the comments. I want to know. Now let me take you back to where this started. The call came on a Tuesday, October 4th, 2022. I was at work, sitting at my desk at the nonprofit where I handled donor accounts, eating a sad desk lunch of leftover pasta, when my phone lit up. My husband. I picked up on the second ring. "It's Mom," he said. "The hospital called. She had another episode. They're saying we should come." We drove to Mercy General that evening. His mother, Margaret, was 71 years old and had been living with congestive heart failure for 2 years. She was a small woman, sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet dignity that made you want to sit up straighter around her. She had strong opinions about casseroles and weak opinions about reality television, and she had never once, in the 6 years I'd been married to her son, made me feel like anything less than family. The cardiologist met us in the hallway. The prognosis wasn't good. She could be weeks, he said. Could be months. It would depend on how she responded to the new medication protocol. She responded for 8 months. I want you to understand what those 8 months look like, because it matters for what came later. My husband, whose name is Owen, was the oldest of 3. His sister Brooke was 28, living in Portland, working remotely, came home when she could. His younger brother Caleb was 26, lived 15 minutes from his parents, and spent most of those 15 minutes doing anything but visiting. His father, Franklin, was 74, a retired contractor, a man who communicated primarily through silence and lawn maintenance. Margaret could not be left alone. She needed help with medications, with meals, with the compression stockings that she hated, and the oxygen concentrator she refused to acknowledge. Owen worked full-time as a structural engineer. His father refused to hire outside help. "Family takes care of family," Franklin said, every time I suggested it. So I became the help. I reduced my hours at work. I drove to their house in Westerville 3 mornings a week, sometimes 4. I sat with Margaret during her cardiology appointments. I organized her medications into those little weekly pill organizers, 2 of them, one for morning, one for evening, and I kept a log on my phone of which doses she'd taken and which ones she'd skipped because the blue ones made her nauseous. I learned to make her chicken soup the way she liked it, with wide egg noodles and a little too much dill. She told me once, in February, that I was a better nurse than her own children. I told her that wasn't a high bar. She laughed. She had a good laugh. Here is the other thing I did, because it is the thing that mattered most later. Margaret had a personal checking account that she managed separately from the household account she shared with Franklin. It was her money. Money she had inherited from her own mother, money she'd kept quietly separate for 40 years. She had asked me in November 2022 to help her manage it. "Franklin doesn't understand online banking," she said, which was her way of saying she didn't want Franklin involved. I had online access to that account and made no secret of it. Owen knew. I transferred money at her direction, $800 to Brooke for a flight home in December, $1,200 for a medical recliner her insurance wouldn't cover, $300 to her church's memorial fund for a friend who had passed. Every transaction, I texted Margaret a summary. Every transaction, she replied with some version of "Good, thank you, dear." She passed on June 14, 2023. A Wednesday morning. I was not there, and I have never stopped feeling guilty about that, even though I know it's irrational. Owen and Franklin were with her. I was on my way. I'd gotten the call at 6:52 a.m. and was in the car by 7,001, but she was gone by 7,023. Owen called me when I was 12 minutes away. I pulled over on Cemetery Road, which felt like something out of a bad movie, and I sat there for a while before I could drive again. The funeral was on June 19th, a Monday. Grace Lutheran Church on High Street in Westerville. She had requested no dark colors, so people came in navy and cream and soft gray. The flowers were dahlias. She had specified dahlias in her notes. The accusation started 4 days later. I was at home on June 23rd when Owen came back from having lunch with his father and his brother. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and he had a look on his face I'd never seen before, like he was somewhere between angry and confused, and he didn't know which one to land on. "Dad says there's money missing from Mom's account," he said. I looked up from my laptop. "What?" He says he went through her statements. He says over the past 8 months, over $200,000 moved through the account, and he can't account for where it went. I set the laptop down. "Owen, I handled that account. Every transaction was at your mother's direction. I have texts from her for most of them." He rubbed his face. "I know, I told him that. And he says the texts don't prove you didn't transfer money she didn't authorize. I did not steal from your mother." He looked at the table. "I know. But he said it the way someone says something they want to believe rather than something they do believe. And that distinction, small as it sounds, turned out to matter more than anything else." By June 28th, Franklin had retained a civil attorney. By July 5th, Owen's younger brother Caleb had started texting me directly. "You should do the right thing," he wrote at 11:16 p.m. on a Thursday. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't answer. Brooke said nothing. That was the part I kept coming back to. Brooke had been there, not as often as me, but she'd been there. She had seen how it worked, and she said nothing. By July, Owen and I were sleeping in the same bed, but living in entirely different places. He wasn't cruel. He never said he believed them, but he stopped touching my arm when he walked past me in the kitchen, stopped reaching for my hand when we sat on the porch in the evenings. I could feel him calculating what's true, what's possible. What does this mean if I'm wrong about her? On August 3rd, 2023, he told me he thought we should separate for a while. "Just to give this space to resolve," he said. "I'm not saying I believe them. I just think we need room to think." I looked at him for a long time. "If I'm proven innocent, will you have needed the room?" He didn't answer. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville 3 days later. I took my clothes, my grandmother's quilt, and the coffee maker because I was not going to suffer through this without decent coffee. I did not take any photographs of us because I couldn't look at them. The civil attorney sent a demand letter to my personal address on August 19th. The family was claiming $204,000 in unauthorized transfers from Margaret's account. They wanted repayment plus legal fees. They had, in their estimation, compelling evidence of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I called an attorney the same afternoon. Her name was Sandra Reeves, Family Law and Civil Litigation, out of Columbus. She was calm and efficient, and she told me that the first thing we needed was a full account of every transaction I had made on that account. I already had it, because I had kept records from the beginning. Not because I suspected anything would go wrong. Because Margaret had asked me to. "Keep track for me," she'd said back in November. "Franklin will ask eventually, and I want to be able to show him." So I had a spreadsheet, 12 tabs, one for each month, date, amount, payee, purpose, and a column I labeled MM Confirmed where I logged her text responses. I sent everything to Sandra. She went through it, line by line, cross-referenced it against the bank statements, and called me on a Friday afternoon. "Nora," she said, "your records are immaculate. Every transfer is documented. Every dollar is accounted for. There is no missing $200,000. The total in transfers over those 8 months was $41,380, all of which matches your records and all of which, based on your documentation, was authorized." Then where is the $200,000 they're claiming? She paused. That is a very good question. She filed a motion requesting the full account history and asked Franklin's attorney to produce the basis for their claim. What came back was confusing. Franklin had apparently been looking at the total outflow of the account over 3 years, not 8 months, and had included transfers that predated my involvement entirely. His attorney seemed embarrassed. The demand letter went quiet after that, but the family didn't. Franklin stopped speaking to me entirely. Caleb texted Owen to say that even if the numbers were technically explained, I had clearly taken advantage of his mother's trust. Brooke went back to Portland and, as far as I could tell, chose not to form an opinion, which was its own kind of verdict. Owen and I spoke every week or so. We were not divorced. We were not reconciled. We existed in a kind of limbo that I told myself was temporary and started to fear was permanent. I went back to full-time hours at work. I started running again, something I hadn't done since before Margaret got sick. I ran the Olentangy Trail at 6 a.m., 3 times a week, and I thought about Margaret while I ran, and about what she would have said about all of this. I thought she probably would have had something precise and devastating to say about her husband and her youngest son, and then she would have offered me chicken soup. I missed her. That was the thing no one seemed to register. I was grieving her, and I was also being prosecuted for loving her. And those two things sat in my chest at the same time, and I didn't know what to do with either of them. If you've ever been accused of something terrible by the exact people you sacrificed for, type the word sacrificed in the comments, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. The call came on a Saturday in March 2024, 9 months after Margaret's funeral. I was sitting on my apartment floor assembling an IKEA bookshelf that I had no real need for, but had bought because building something with my hands felt like the only productive option that day. My phone rang. Brooke. I stared at it through 2 full rings. Brooke had not called me once since the funeral. Not once. We had exchanged exactly 3 texts, all logistical, all related to the estate, and that was the entirety of our relationship for 9 months. I picked up. I need to show you something, she said. Can you meet me? Where are you? Columbus. I flew in this morning. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because I found something in Mom's things that I should have looked at 8 months ago, and I didn't, and I need you to see it before my dad does. I put the IKEA screws down. What did you find? Please just come. I'm at the house. I drove to Westerville. It was 11:43 a.m. when I pulled into the driveway of the house where Owen had grown up, the house where I'd sat at Margaret's kitchen table for 8 months, the house that did not feel like anything familiar anymore. Brooke's rental car was in the driveway. Franklin's truck was not. Brooke met me at the door. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was holding a large manila envelope with both hands, the way you hold something you're afraid to put down. Dad's at Caleb's, she said. He'll be back by 2. We have about 2 hours. I followed her into the kitchen. The house was the same lace curtains, same calendar on the fridge, same ceramic rooster on the counter that Margaret had bought at a craft fair in 2009 and refused to get rid of. It smelled like the same fabric softener. It felt like grief stored in wood and plaster. Brooke sat down at the table. She set the envelope in front of me. After Dad filed the legal thing, she said, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Because I was there, Nora. Not as much as you, but I was there. And what they were saying about you didn't match what I saw. But I didn't know how to say that without it becoming a whole thing with Dad, and I took the easy way, and I'm sorry. I looked at the envelope. What's in there? Mom left it with her attorney. Sealed, addressed to me, with a note on the outside that said open after 6 months. She slid it across the table. I opened it last week. The envelope had already been opened. I lifted the flap. Inside was a letter and 4 additional sealed envelopes, each labeled in Margaret's handwriting. The letter was 2 pages, written by hand in Margaret's small, precise cursive on her good stationery. The date at the top was April 2nd, 2023, 10 weeks before she died. Brooke, if you're reading this, it means I've been gone long enough that things have probably gotten complicated. I know your father. I know Caleb, and I know that if there is any question about money, they will look for the easiest explanation. And the easiest explanation will be Nora. I'm writing this so that doesn't happen unchallenged. Nora managed my account at my request, with my full knowledge, with my explicit direction for every transaction. I have copies of my own text to her confirming this. I am enclosing them. I also want you to know something that I never said to your father, because your father has never been able to hear things he doesn't want to hear. I changed my will in February. The original named your father as sole executor with full discretion. The new version includes protections for Nora's role in my final months. My attorney, James Whitfield at Whitfield & Associates in Westerville, has the signed document. If your father claims Nora stole from me, he is wrong. If Caleb claims it, he is repeating something he heard without looking at a single piece of paper. Please look at the papers, Brooke. You always were the one who actually looked. I set the letter down. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. There's more, Brooke said quietly. I opened the first envelope. It was a printed copy of Margaret's text exchanges with me, 18 pages. Every conversation from November 2022 through June 2023. She had printed them, dated them, and written a short note at the top. These are my instructions to Nora. All transfers were requested by me. I was aware of every dollar. The second envelope was a bank statement, not the statement Franklin had used, but an annotated one. Margaret had gone through 3 months of statements herself, in pen, and written next to each transaction what it was for. Medical recliner, Brooks flight, Christmas, church memorial, Vivian H. Holiday groceries delivered because my back won't allow me to stand in a store anymore. Nora picked up the difference. She should not have had to. That last line, she should not have had to. That last line, she should not have had to. I had to put it down for a moment. The third envelope was 2 pages from her attorney, a letter from James Whitfield confirming that Margaret had revised her will on February 17, 2023, that the revision was legally executed and that a copy was on file. The will included a specific clause. I affirm that Nora Callahan provided financial management assistance at my explicit request and with my full authorization, and that no transfers made under her access to my account constituted misappropriation in any form. She had put it in the will. She had anticipated this. And she had built a legal record. The fourth envelope was the one that stopped me completely. It was a handwritten note, 1 page, addressed to me directly. Not to Brooke, to me. Nora. I know this might reach you eventually. I hope it does. I want you to know that I was aware of everything you gave up to be here with me. The hours at work, the weekends, the drives, the pill organizers. I noticed that you alphabetized the medications once when you thought I was asleep. You are the only person who alphabetized anything in this house since 1987, and I have the organized spice cabinet to prove it. I don't know exactly what will happen after I'm gone, but I know my family. And I know you, and I wanted you to have something to stand on, because I was afraid that after I was gone, no one would stand with you. I'm sorry if I was right about that. You deserved better from my son. You deserved better from all of us. Thank you for the soup. It was always perfect. I sat in Margaret's kitchen for a long time after I finished reading. The ceramic rooster sat on the counter. The lace curtains moved a little in the heat from the radiator. Brooke was crying quietly. I wasn't, and I didn't understand why until later when I was driving home. I was too far past grief to cry. I had been carrying this for 9 months, and I had just set it down, and the feeling was not relief. It was something colder. Clarity. She knew. She knew they would do this, and she built me a case from her deathbed, and she still died before she could protect me in person. Brooke drove me to James Whitfield's office that afternoon. He was a quiet man in his late 60s, and he confirmed everything: the will revision, the affidavit clause, the fact that he had been waiting for someone to come and ask about it. Mrs. Callahan was very specific about her intentions, he said. She said she wanted the documentation to be airtight. Did you contact anyone in the family after she passed? I asked. He looked at me carefully. I sent a letter to her husband in July informing him of the will revision and the relevant clause. He did not respond. Franklin had known. The attorney had told him, and he had filed the civil demand anyway. I called Sandra Reeves from the parking lot of the attorney's office. I gave her everything: the letter, the annotated bank statement, the attorney's confirmation, the personal note. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Nora," she said, "this doesn't just clear you. This potentially opens Franklin and Caleb to a counterclaim for filing a bad faith civil demand against someone they had documented evidence was not culpable." "I don't want a counterclaim," I said. "I want my name back." "Then let's start there." She sent certified letters the following week to Franklin's attorney, to the estate, to the civil court where the demand had been filed. She attached copies of everything. The demand was formally withdrawn 9 days later. I drove to Westerville on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks after that. Not to the house. I drove to Grace Lutheran, to the small memorial garden in the back where Margaret had asked to have her cremains placed. There was a stone bench, and her name on a small marker near a rosebush that, in April, was just starting to bud. I sat on the bench for a while. I hadn't been able to come here since the funeral. Too much noise in my head, too much unresolved, too much of everything contaminated, but the garden was quiet. Just birdsong and a little wind and the smell of turned earth from where someone had been doing early spring planting. "You were right about them," I said. "And I'm still not sure if that makes you wise or just tired." I told her about the apartment in Clintonville, about the morning runs, about Sandra Reeves and the withdrawn demand, and James Whitfield confirming what she had put in writing. I told her about the bookshelf I'd built on the floor of my apartment on the Saturday Burke called, and how I'd never actually finished assembling it because I'd dropped everything to drive to Westerville, and how it was still sitting in pieces in my living room, and somehow that felt like a metaphor I couldn't quite nail down. I thanked her for the note, specifically for the line about the spice cabinet. I stayed for 40 minutes. When I left, I didn't feel exonerated exactly. I felt grief. Real grief. The kind I hadn't been allowed to feel because it kept getting buried under everything else. Grief for Margaret, and grief for the marriage I wasn't sure was coming back, and grief for the 9 months I had spent being someone's villain. Owen and I have talked 3 times since Brooke shared the documents with him. He read his mother's note to me. Brooke made sure of that, and he called me the same night. He said, "I'm sorry, Nora. I should have held the line." I said, "Yes, you should have." He asked if I would be willing to try again. I told him I didn't know yet. I meant it. I'm not punishing him. I'm also not pretending it didn't happen. He made a choice in August, and it was the wrong one, and we both have to live in the reality of that choice while we figure out if there's something left worth returning to. Franklin has not called. Caleb sent 1 text. "I heard about the documents. I wasn't trying to attack you personally." I read it twice. I didn't answer. An apology that includes the word "but" before it's even started isn't an apology. Brooke is the only one I talk to with any regularity now. She calls every couple of weeks. She doesn't make excuses for what she didn't do. She just shows up now, which is more than most people manage. I'm still in the Clintonville apartment. The bookshelf got finished eventually. A Sunday afternoon with a podcast and a glass of wine and the satisfaction of something finally being what it was supposed to be. It holds my books and a photo of Margaret from Christmas 2021, the year before she got sick, when she was laughing at something Owen's father had said. She looks completely herself in it, sharp-eyed and present and a little bit like she already knew something you didn't. If you were me, would you go back to Owen? Type yes, no, or not yet in the comments. I think about it every day and I still don't have an answer. What I do have is a record, 18 pages of texts, an annotated bank statement, a letter from an attorney, a personal note on good stationery, and the memory of a woman who spent her last weeks of energy building a case file so that someone she loved would not have to fight alone. My mother-in-law saw what was coming. She couldn't stop it. But she made sure I had something to stand on when it arrived. I don't know if I'll ever sit at Franklin's table again. I don't know if Owen and I will find our way back, or if we are the kind of story that ends quietly, with 2 people who loved each other and failed each other and eventually had to let that be true. I don't know if Caleb will ever understand what it costs to accuse someone who is innocent, but I know Margaret knew who I was, and she made sure I could prove it. For 9 months, I carried an accusation I didn't earn. Now I only carry the truth and a note about a spice cabinet and the clean and uncomplicated grief of missing someone who actually saw me. That's a weight I can live with. I've thought a lot about what Margaret actually did in those last weeks. She was dying. She was on medication. She was managing a household, a husband who didn't listen, and the knowledge that her own son and the man she'd been married to for decades were going to do something wrong the moment she wasn't there to stop it. And instead of resting, she sat down with her good stationery and she built me a case file. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and chose to spend her remaining energy on it anyway. I think about cause and effect a lot differently now than I did 3 years ago. Not in any cosmic sense. I'm not talking about the universe balancing scales or anything like that. I mean the simple, mechanical truth that what we choose to do and what we choose not to do produces outcomes. Franklin chose to file a civil demand against someone he had documented evidence was innocent. That choice produced consequences he didn't anticipate: a withdrawn claim, a damaged family, a daughter-in-law who will never fully trust him again. Caleb chose to send threatening texts at 11 p.m. without reading a single piece of paper. That choice produced a relationship with his brother's wife that is, at this point, beyond repair. Owen chose to ask for space when I needed him to hold the line. That choice is still producing consequences, ones we're both living inside of right now, not sure yet what they add up to. And I made choices too. I kept records. Not because I suspected anything. I kept them because Margaret asked me to, and because it was the right way to handle someone else's money. That choice, made quietly over 18 months of Wednesday mornings and pill organizers and annotated bank statements, turned out to be the thing that saved me. Not dramatically, not all at once. But in the end, it was the receipts that mattered, not the accusations. I think that's the thing I would want anyone to take from this. Not that good things happen to good people. I'm not sure I believe that in any straightforward way. But I do believe that the habits we build when no one is watching are the ones that protect us when everything goes wrong. I kept records because it was the right thing to do. Margaret wrote that letter because she had the wisdom to see what was coming and the character to do something about it, even when she was exhausted and running out of time. Those weren't grand gestures. They were just the quiet, unglamorous work of being honest and paying attention. 9 months of being accused of something I didn't do taught me that I can survive being wrong in someone else's story. It hurt in ways I'm still sorting through, but I never stopped knowing who I was. I never stopped being able to look at the spreadsheet and know that every line was clean. That certainty, not arrogance, just the plain fact of having done things right, was the only thing that got me through the months when Owen wasn't sure, when Franklin was filing paperwork. When I was assembling IKEA furniture on my apartment floor at 31 years old, trying to feel like my life was still mine, Margaret saw all of that before it happened, and she made sure I had something to stand on. I'm still figuring out what comes next. The apartment in Clintonville, the morning runs, the phone calls with Brooke every couple of weeks, Owen who is trying and who I am not ready to stop believing in, but also not ready to pretend nothing happened. It's complicated, and I'm letting it be complicated because that's the honest thing to do. What I'm not doing anymore is carrying something that was never mine.